Hello, everybody. For those of you that's joining us, a very warm welcome to our evening webinar on the Sustainable Farming Incentive Pilot. We're expecting over 100 people joining us tonight, and I can see there's still a number of people trying to get into the meeting. So we'll just leave it for another couple of minutes before we begin. For those of you that have joined us, you can see that it is a webinar session this evening. So you won't be able to see each other, but you can see the panelists who will be speaking and answering your questions at the end. If you can't hear us or you're having any technical problems, please do pop your name in the chat and one of my team will reach out and help you. We'll begin shortly. Thanks for bearing with us. Hello, good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this August SFI Pilot Update webinar. My name, if you haven't met me, is Louise Maguire, and I lead the test trials and the Sustainable Farming Incentive Pilot team. So before we begin, a couple of things. One, the session's been recorded this evening. So it's been recorded so that we can circulate it because we know there was people that couldn't make the sessions that we popped on yesterday and today. And we know that people like to listen back as well. So we will be recording the session and we will be sharing the link on SharePoint. As you can see, as I've outlined before we started, it is a webinar today, so you won't be able to see each other, but you can see the panelists who will be going through today's presentation and here to answer any questions at the end. If you are struggling, if you can't hear us, please do let us know, pop your name in the chat and the problems that you're having, and one of my team will reach out and help you. I'll go through the agenda in one moment, but if you do have a question, we're hoping that we've got room at the end to take some we'll have a question and answer session, and how we're taking questions is on the Q&A button. So depending on the platform that you've joined the Zoom meeting on this evening, there should be a Q&A button. You can see it on your slide, and if you click on that, you can submit any questions on the content of today's webinar. So you will see there's some open questions, but there's also a tab for answered questions. What we will be doing in the background, if you do submit a question, the team will be trying to answer some of those questions because we know we generally get quite a lot of questions. So please don't think if your question's gone that that we haven't been able to answer it. Do look in the answer tab because we'll have, but I'll try and cover as many of the questions that we have, even the answered ones at the end. What I'd recommend you do is please don't put any questions in the chat quite yet until you've heard all of the presentations that we have, because the answer to your question might come up in one of the questions. If you do have any specific questions about your individual agreement, we recommend that you either email the RPA or the SFI Pilot Learning DEFRA address, and we've just got them up there. We will put them up at the end as well. You have the next slide, please. So today's webinar is a little bit different, where we are having some polls. There will be around 5 polls in your webinar. Don't worry, Liz will take you through the polls. They will pop up and you'll be able to enter your answer. You'll have around 30 seconds to a minute to to place your answer in the poll, and it's just to give us an indication of your understanding of the topic that we're talking about and where we should go next. Of course, if you are watching a recording of the webinar, please remember you won't be able to poll. So I'll quickly go on to the agenda. So today is really an update session. And we're bringing together a number of streams that we wanted to provide you with an update on. The first is the changes to capital grants that Liz is going to take you through in a bit more detail. So all the information, all the important information that you need to know about what's happening with capital grants and what you need to do by when. We've begun the site visits for year 2 of the pilot. So we're just going to again take you through the site visit process in terms of what to expect and when we're doing it, and some of the things that we've learned from the first year of doing site visits in the pilot. We're then going to do a very quick recap of the actions in the 23 offer for the sustainable farming incentives and look at differences and compatibility with the pilot and what's going to be available from when. We recognise this is information that we went through back in June, but we know there's been lots of questions about it, so this will be a helpful recap in terms of where we are and where we're going. Then I'm going to hand it over to Harry from the Forestry Commission. And we thought it was a great opportunity to bring you this piece of work. So the Forestry Commission has been working closely with some of our pilot farmers, particularly those that have got the Farm Woodland standard in their agreement. And there's some really interesting results coming out up from that work that we thought, when we had the opportunity of this webinar, that we'd share that with you today. And then finally, at the end, we'll pause for Q&A and hopefully we'll have about 10 minutes to answer your questions. So without any further ado, I will hand over to Liz, who is going to take you through the capital grants.
Hi, good evening, everyone. You've probably seen me at a few of these, but I am the person behind the newsletter and the virtual and face-to-face events, really, along with the team. But I just wanted to give you a bit of a reminder about the notification that you should have had from the RPA recently, but that was back in July, to let you know that the SFI Pilot Capital Grant Scheme will be closing for applications. That will be at the end of this month, but that will be very swiftly replaced with the CS standalone capital grants that will be available to you instead. So this should be a positive change. It will enable you to access a wider range of items, give you a longer time to claim, and you can use them on land that isn't in the pilot as well. For those of you that do have a SFI Pilot Capital Grant, is not going to be closed or stopped early. There is no rush to get claims and things in. It will continue as normal until the end of its agreement or your pilot agreement, whichever is first. If you have applied but not submitted a claim as yet, you can request to withdraw your application if you'd prefer, so you're then able to apply through CS Standalone Capital Grant Scheme. If your capital grant agreement is live in the pilot, you can request to end it early, but if you've made a claim or had any payments, you may have to pay those back. So just take a look at the agreement that you have, or if you would like to make any changes. And just take you through the CS capital grants. Do check the item requirements. Some will require advice or approvals, which may not have been needed in the SFI pilot. And you can only apply for one type of each capital grant per SBI per year, but you may be able to apply for different types of capital grant within the same year. So we do want to bring to your attention, if you were in the Farm Woodland standard and interested in the Expand Your Woodland item, that is available in the SFI Pilot Capital Grant. So really you want to apply now before the end of the month to access that one. So for example, the TE4 will have different requirements under CS, which means you may be unable to receive the grant. So best to apply now, even if you're not planting till later in the year, get your application in and the process going there. But if you have any questions at all, do contact the RPA at their ruralpayments@defra.gov.uk address. And as Louise says, we've got a poll for you. These are my favourite bits. So I will launch that now. This one has 2 questions in it. And what we'd like to know is if you're likely to apply for a capital grant while you're in the pilot. You may have already had a capital grant and don't need another. You may be very keen just hedging your bets. And also, what do you think about the option to apply through CS standalone. Does that feel better for you, or not too sure? So I'll give a few more seconds and then I can share the results so you can feel what others have clicked, see what others feel and what they've clicked. The clicks are still going up. We've got about 80% of people have participated. We've got over 100 here today, about 117 my poll is telling me. But I will end that there, share the results. And again, quite an even split. We had this webinar yesterday, and again, an even split with the yes, no, maybe for applying for capital grants. And it seems like you do feel it's positive, maybe not quite sure, still looking at the information, but that's good for us. It's good to offer you some wider benefits there. So that's it for capital grants. Just quickly on to site visits. We held 119 visits last year in year 1 of the pilot. Just over half were satisfactory, straightforward and had no changes at all. And then just under half required some form of update. But with some surveys and studies, many of you told us that the site visit was supportive and RPA field officers were helpful and knowledgeable. Many felt that the site visits were a different experience to inspections that they've had in previous schemes. So that's great. That's definitely what we're looking to move towards, and glad that came across. Those that had the site visits really felt pleased to be able to ask someone lots of questions and increase their confidence when submitting their annual declarations and moving on into the second year of the pilot. You did tell us that the notice period for the site visits varied. We say we'll give you up to 72 hours notice, but I think this was quite different for many participants. And also, as much as the site visit went well, the post-site visit process was unclear and reports were delayed, and these caused payment delays, which obviously made many frustrated there. So that was definitely a finding that you were telling us about. However, from the RPA and the DEFRA side, we were working on the guidance and how to run the site visits on the job, basically, as we went. So each case helped us build guidance and processes. So that's possibly what may have caused some of the delays. We did find some common issues that required further development, for example, mapping and measurement of the hedgerows and other linear actions. There was also about the eligibility of certain features to enter in the first place. For example, there was a little bit of confusion with hedges that border woodlands or areas of woodland which didn't quite meet the minimum block size. So many of these are showing us that the guidance needed to be clearer, and hopefully it's something that we've worked on ready for SFI to not have those kind of not too sure eligibility statements. Actually, it's quite clear what is and isn't available for each of the actions. We saw that the site visit follow-up reports and adjustments took longer than expected as well. But all of the processes and changes worked fine, so we can implement them into year 2. And we were pleased and could feel the positive relationships built through using RPA field officers at visits rather than inspections. So now the RPA and us have learned quite a lot of that first year, and we've got the guidance in place ready to hopefully have a very smooth year 2 site visits. And just to say about those coming up, they'll be undertaken by field officers as they were in year 1. It would be a random selection again, as per year 1, which may mean that those that have had a visit already may be visited again because it's totally random. Once the visit has been completed, the field officer will create a report for the RPA, and then they will contact you if there are any questions or concerns from the visit. So as you can hear, we've definitely learned a lot over the first year, and hopefully we're going to the second year with quite a smoother process. So welcome your feedback as we go through that second year on site visits. So thank you very much. That's me done, and I will hand over to Sam.
Thanks, Liz, and evening, everybody. Thanks again for coming this evening. It's good to see some familiar faces on or names on our list. So I'm just going to go through a bit about the SFI offer for 2023 and also compatibility with the pilot and your pilot agreements. First of all, just thought it might be quite useful to just give a bit of a recap on the pilot and in terms of the pilot itself and the continuation of that. And I know that lots of you came to the webinars that we did when we first made the sort of additional information announcement about the offer for 23 and back at the end of June. So some of this is repeated because obviously it's still quite relevant, but hopefully it's a sort of a useful reminder or an opportunity just to see it again. But as I say, to start off with, just to confirm that although the offer for SFI in 23 is much expanded and will be opening shortly, the pilot itself, so your pilot, the pilot agreement will still continue. So the full range of standards and levels of ambition, the different level of ambitions are still available to all participants in the third year. We're not making any specific changes to your agreement, so we would expect the you to continue with the delivery of your agreements, and we'll also because it's continuing in the same way, and we're going to be doing the same sort of learning things. The pilot participation payment will continue again in year 3 and on the same basis as year 2, which is obviously £5,000 per agreement. Because although we're beginning to roll more elements of our new schemes out and SFI in particular, the pilot still remains a really, really important part of our learning and co-design sort of process. It's the only live scheme in this sort of new world that we've got running where we can test things, like the operational side, like the site visits in a real live environment. So we do lots of work and lots of workshops and things, but you guys in the pilot are the only ones that are testing that in a live sort of situation. So it's really important, and we're still feeding in feedback, at the standards themselves and how they are working, how you're adapting to that. So it's still a really, really important part. So on the basis that pilot's continuing, the amendment windows for year 3 are starting to approach now, and at the point where you can review your agreement. So you may want to add more land in or standards or increase or decrease levels of ambition. For those, the first sort of set of agreements started in November, back in November 2021, so those sort of first ones, your November start date, the amendment window where you can start looking at your agreements is now open, and I think it runs from yesterday to the 15th, or today to the 15th of October. So you've got that 2 months to have a look at your window. And if you haven't already been notified about that, then you should be notified shortly by the RPA, so that you've got that sort of reminder there. And obviously future start dates will be notified in sort of like on a monthly basis. So that's continuing. It's worth remembering that, particularly if you do want to make a change or you've been thinking about that over the last year or so. And also, as with last year, you'll need to submit an annual declaration to confirm the delivery of the standards in your agreement over year 2. So again, like with the amendment window, the RPA will be in touch to confirm when your annual declaration period opens as well, where you can sign in through the RPA portal and then into your agreement and tick that declaration or give them additional information. But just hopefully a bit of a reminder about that. So then moving on to the offer for SFI in 2023. Again, hopefully you're all aware, and lots of you came to our webinars, but we told you back at the end of June a bit more details about the launch and a bit more detail about the individual sets of actions that are going to be available. So we're not going to go into too much detail about that. But if you fancy watching that webinar again, where we went into the detail of the offer and a bit more, do have a look on the SPOL site. I think Joseph put a link in the chat, so you can have a re-look. But one of the things we did say was that as part of the publication, we've published a handbook, which was much requested, and we felt quite a feat for us to be able to sort of published a handbook which you can save to your desktop, or you can print out, or you can bookmark different parts of it. But one of the things with handbooks, which has always been one of our things that we've wanted to balance between giving those sort of materials out, is that, you know, particularly with new schemes, things do change. We do get feedback, we do review things, and already we've had a few minor updates made to the handbook. Those have been published now. And they're on the online. So if you click on the link to the handbook on the .gov pages, it will be an updated handbook, and there's also a separate document which just highlights the particular changes. They are minor, so there's nothing significant in terms of, you know, huge changes to the offer or to the eligibility, but there have been a few changes, so they are highlighted. So if you have already printed a handbook off or saved it to your desktop, I'd recommend that you just update that now. And there's just a bit of a thanks, because some of the changes have come from pilot participants. So we've had some feedback from you already, looking particularly about compatibility with pilot standards, and those of you that are in the room will know who you are, but thanks to those that have already looked at it in sort of detail and thought about it and come back to us, because we fed that back to policy teams, and that made it in the first set of changes. So that was really good. As we said, actions for the offer in 23 will be individual actions rather than in a set of standards like you've got in your pilot agreements. So you can pick and mix which actions you want from the different sort of themes. So we've still got like improved grassland, low no input grassland, hedgerows, soils, but there's a set of actions, and you can decide which one of those actions you want to put into your agreements, or all of them. And in addition, you can also decide how much land you want to put into each action as well. So rather than by parcel, so it's based upon an area of land and a payment, or for hedgerows, it's on a linear meterage. And we'll give you a bit more sort of details of some of those differences between the pilot in between shortly. There's a rolling application window. So when we do open, a bit like we did for the SFI 22 offer last year, once we open the application window, it will be a rolling, so there won't be any specific cutoff date or particular date that runs. And we're testing that sort of approach and see how people, whether they like that, how that sort of works. Again, it's quite different to the pilot, where we had that sort of single sort of time to get your applications in by. But once we start that, we'll be starting a controlled rollout sort of any day. I think we're just waiting to make sure that everything is right and in place where we can do that. And it will be a controlled rollout, which will mean that we'll be doing it with a small number of people initially, just to make sure that the system works, because it's a sort of a new system that we're using. We've put quite a bit more into it than we perhaps originally planned to do. So we just want to make sure that that is working, and is also, it works well with a small number of people, because then that we can open it out to the sort of the wider farming community more quickly when we know it does work. So hopefully that will be good. If any of you as pilot participants are also thinking about SFI 23 applications, and either, and we're interested in being a sort of part of that controlled rollout, because we do want to sort of check that with pilot participants as well, because that's a sort of another type of scenario, type of applicant that will come in. Please do get in contact with the RPA, and if you follow the advice through the links in the handbook, it will tell you how to apply and what will happen, because obviously before applications are open, you have to apply through the RPA. And just to say that SFI 23 actions, although it's sort of quite different, we're still following the no advice principle. So it's still about that you should be able to do these actions yourselves without needing to get advice if you don't want to. I mean, obviously, if you choose to have advice or talk to your advisors or agronomists around the actions and how that would fit on your farm, that's absolutely fine. But we've still, in SFI at the moment, we're still working on that basis of that what we're putting in the schemes and what we're requiring you to deliver in those schemes, you should be able to be empowered to do it yourself. What we have done is publish some how-to guides to assist that, as well as sort of the details about eligibility and the mandatory elements that are in the handbook. We've got these how-to guides that we've published in the last week or so, which sort of say how you could do it. So they're not mandatory, but they do give you an idea of the sorts of things that we're thinking or expecting you to do depending upon your circumstances. And so they're quite a useful tool to have a look at and think, well, yes, I see that, I understand that's probably what I could do, or that would require me to think about what I'm doing a bit more if I apply for that. So again, if you're looking, do go and have a look at those guides as well, and we've got a link circulated for that. So just a bit on stacking SFI Pilot and SFI, so the new SFI agreements. If you are thinking about a full SFI agreement as well, it will be separate to your pilot agreement. So it won't be added onto your pilot agreement, completely separate, and it will, and it doesn't need to run to the same start date as your pilot agreement. So although you may choose to do that for sort of ease of administration or for other business or financial reasons, you don't have to. If you want to keep it separate, some may want to keep it separate for very good reasons, but it will be separate. And if you do take a new agreement out, you will be eligible for this SFI management payment, which is a payment that is part of the full scheme, and would be in addition to your SFI Pilot participation payment, because that's through the pilot scheme. So it's quite separate. In the webinar that we did last back in June, we gave a bit more details about the management payment, because there are there's a few sort of elements to that. For example, it's based upon the area actions, so not the actions that are done on a whole farm basis like the nutrient management and IPM. And also it is possible to have a number of SFI agreements per SBI, but you will only receive one management payment per SBI, and that's intended to be based upon the first SFI agreement that you've got, and it will be worked out on that basis. But you're not precluded by receiving the participation payment through the pilot scheme. You're not precluded from the management payment in the full scheme. If you do wish to stack your sort of SFI and your pilot agreement, that's fine. You may wish to amend your pilot agreement to accommodate more SFI actions in the full scheme, if that's how you wish to do that. Again, there are some subtleties around that, so you can obviously make amendments without any sort of recovery issue around your annual review period, or on the anniversary of your agreement, your pilot agreement renewing, or you can make amendments midterm if you want to, but obviously if it's midterm, there could well be recoveries from the scheme year that you're in, so you'd need to sort of weigh that up in terms of how you want to manage both the land and the payments that come through from the different schemes. But you can stack or you can amend to complement each other. So that's we've tried to make it as flexible going forward as we develop our schemes and understand the eligibility and how it works in practice on farms, and both from our side with the RPA and the operational side. We're trying to make it as flexible as possible as we go forward. What we're also going to do now is just give you a bit of an idea about the compatibility. So if you want to run the two together, we're just going to sort of give you a bit more of an idea or a recap on that. So as I said, you can stack an SFI 23 agreement and co-locate SFI actions on the same land that's in your SFI pilot agreement, but it is subject to our three main principles, and we've talked about these in sort of different scenarios throughout the pilot. But the three principles are that obviously the land's got to be eligible for the actions that you want to select. So it's got, for the grassland actions, it's got to be grassland. For arable and horticultural type actions, you've got to have the right land use for those. So there's got to be an eligibility. The activities or outcomes in particular that you're being paid for in each individual scheme have got to be compatible with each other. So we couldn't have a situation where we're asking you to plant a herbal ley in one scheme and then have a buffer with no sort of activity and non-farming in the other scheme, because they would obviously be incompatible with each other. So there's got to be some compatibility in there, and also you can't through the schemes, you can't be paid twice for a similar activity or a similar outcome on the same area of land at the same time. So you've got to for example, I think we've got soil testing as a requirement in our in our pilot soil standards, and there's obviously SAM1, the soil testing requirement action in the offer for SFI 23. So they would be classed as similar actions. They have the same outcomes, slightly different approach to them, but that would be classed as double funding. So there are those are our sort of three main principles that we have to look at when we allow stacking of agreements together. So what we'll do is just give you a bit of an idea in terms of the stacking, what can be stacked and co-located. So there are some actions in 23 which you can locate on the same land parcel as all SFI pilot standards. So they are as listed there. So our IPM1, the assessment for integrated pest management, the assessment for nutrient management, NUM1, and the hedgerow assessment condition action in the hedgerow, because those are the three that we don't have in the pilot in the same way at all. So they're sort of universally acceptable to be able to stack and co-locate on the land. There are some that have sort of more selective compatibility, so it will depend upon what you have within your existing agreements, depending upon if you selected a soil standard or a hedgerow standard as well. So there are some of those there that do have some selective, but where we can, where they are compatible, then you can do that. And then there are a few actions which can only be located on sort of on a very sort of minimal basis, and that's quite often where they do represent very similar types of activity. So again, the approach might be slightly different, and the eligibility criteria might be slightly different in both schemes, but they do represent effectively the same sort of or very similar outcomes. And so there are lots of things like within the land standards and the soil standards that replicate what we've got in the actions in the offer for 2023. And also it must be remembered that when because the pilot works in a group of actions rolled up together or bundled together in a standard, it only means that it only takes one of those actions in that standard, which then effectively makes the whole standard incompatible with one of the actions. So sometimes you might look at some of the actions and think, well, I could do that. That's not, that's perfectly compatible, or it's not double funding, or it would be eligible, but there could be another action within your sort of set of standards, which then causes it to be incompatible or classed as double funding. So there are, we have to take that into account as well. So if we move on to the next slide, we won't dwell on this slide too much because it's quite busy, but what we've tried to do, and we'll make these slides available after the webinar so that you can have a look at them in a bit more time, but we've tried to show either by looking at SFI 23 actions or by your SFI pilot standards, which is the which ones are compatible and which ones are not. So you can see there's still a fair amount of green compatibility, even though we've got to recognise that there are lots of things that have similar outcomes or aren't compatible with each other. So we've got those through there, and also the handbook, the SFI 23 handbook, under each action also lists which SFI pilot standards and the details of those standards are eligible as well. So if you want to look at a particular action in 23, you can also look in the handbook, and it will tell you which are compatible. It also tells you for the other schemes, so particularly for countryside stewardship and mid-tier options, you can see the compatibility there as well if you're running those agreements too. So if we move on, so as I mentioned at the start, there are quite a few differences between the full offer for SFI in 23 and the pilot, and hopefully some of you will see the changes that we have made do echo lots of the feedback that we've had from the pilot or through the pilot so far. So we just wanted, there's quite a number of changes, but we wanted to just highlight a few there. So particularly sort of the buffer actions. So we've had quite a bit of feedback through the pilot about buffer actions being sort of complicated when you've got a buffer action in the say a hedgerow standard and a water body standard and the land standards as well. So what we've done in the full scheme is we've amalgamated that into one action, depending upon on what land use you've got. So we've got an arable buffer or a grassland buffer. That hopefully reduces that complexity. And then you can also decide there's obviously a range within the buffer of how wide it can be, a range of minimum and maximum width, and how much land you can put into that. So that's hopefully a much more flexible feature. As I mentioned earlier, we've introduced a hedgerow condition assessment, and again we'd had quite a bit of feedback about understanding where hedgerows are before starting to do the management, so we put that in. We've looked at flexibility on establishment dates, and I think all of us that worked through the lack of rain last year, and looking at how establishment dates that we put in the pilot are affected by that. And this year we've probably got we've got the same problem, but for different reasons. So we've looked at those, and also how we can make actions rotational as well within the schemes. We've changed some definitions. So again, lots of you that have been involved in the grassland workshops and surveys and things that we've done, we've looked at definitions and tried to make it to change the eligibility sort of based upon how you want to manage the grassland, rather than sort of the specific number of species that you've got in it already. So it's looking at how you want to manage those. Through IPM and nutrient management, we've put the standardized assessments in there, and as I said earlier, we've introduced the management payment and allowed you to stack and co-locate as much as possible, based on our three principles. So hopefully you can see from that we've we really have used lots of the feedback that we've had from the pilot and from lots of others. So we get feedback from our stakeholder groups, from other farmers, from seeing lots of people at agricultural shows, but there's a definite theme of things coming through that we've been feeding through. So it's been really good to to see that and to see that come through. So hopefully that's a useful recap. I think Liz has got one of her polls that she'd like to test with you now, based upon the offer that we're doing. So I'll hand back over to Liz.
Thanks, Sam. There's quite a lot of answers in this one, but basically we're keen to understand if you're looking to apply for SFI, and how you want to apply. Do you want to wait? Do you want to do it now? Do you want to amend your agreement, or are you looking to apply for something else? Or wanting to know more information seems quite a popular one. So we look to get more information as we can and share it with you through our webinars and virtual discussion groups. So I'll give you a little bit longer to consider your answer there. Okay, the answers are starting to slow. We've had 100. So I'll end the poll and share the results with you so you can see as well. So it does seem there is some positivity towards it, but you're wanting to have some more information possibly before you apply. And that seems quite understandable. So thanks for that one. And we'll go on. Harry, are you happy to come in and give us a little bit of an update of what you've learned through your farm woodland visits?
Yeah, thanks, Liz, and hello everybody. I hope everyone's doing well. And right, so we've got a just to give you a bit of a rundown. My name's Harry. I work for the Forestry Commission as an ELM manager. I'm also a farmer from up in Herefordshire, so a bit of both sides of the fence, really. What we're looking at here is the Farm Woodland Standard. Now, in many ways, the SFI is a great mechanism for getting better woodland management out there. Supporting sustainable farm business and a healthy, natural environment. And the advantage woodland has, it's outside the farmed area, and there's lots of chance there to do small incremental changes that have a big effect overall. It's a big asset for people. But part of SFI is we need it to be simple, flexible in its approach, and advice-free, which can suit elements of it, but also it can be a bit of a challenge for your traditional woodland management kind of stuff. So the SFI, on the SFI Pilot, we had an annual payment of £49 per hectare for woodland in the standard, and woodland was eligible. It was over 15 years old, more than 20 meters wide on average, and over 0.5 hectares. If you look at the next slide, just for those that weren't in it or can't remember, we'll run through some of the compulsory actions. So we wanted you to complete a woodland condition assessment, could be done anyway in any way you wanted, but we did provide a template for that. And there was £100 extra payment. Typical woodland threats webinars, which was an extra payment of £40. That was tree pests and diseases, plant biosecurity, and mammalian threats. We had an open space and rides action, which was aiming for around 15% open space, in line with the forestry standard, but somewhere between 10 and 20. And we also had a create and manage deadwood option, which was there to get increased deadwood habitat, and aiming, again, from the forestry standard for 20 cubic meters per hectare. And both of those, we'd restrict them slightly if you were in ancient woodland. And just get you to apply for a felling license and crack on with them. There's 2 optional actions, which didn't get a huge amount of uptake, but we asked some good questions on them, so we'll feedback on those. It's expanding woodlands with some small-scale tree planting, just a small area below the EIA regulations, 0.1 to 0.5 hectares. That was a capital funding option on improved grassland and arable, and a payment for maintaining areas of woodland planted in the last 15 years. What I'll do, just to give you an update of what we did, and I only started the project in March, so I'm new to the world of policy, and as a farmer, it was really great to see the level of investment they've gone to find out what's happening here. I was out for probably about 10 visits at the end, but it's great. We did 107 site visits in total. That was 168 on-farm learning hours. We took part in an interview, a farm walk, and an optional discrete choice experiment that was there. We asked, in total, farmers were asked more than 11,000 questions, and key for me, I think, is that they were given more than 5,000 open response answers. And I think the value of going out and speaking to people in the farm kitchens or on the Polaris, going around and looking at what they're doing, is a great one. And we've got a huge amount of data here. We don't have much time today, so I'm going to fire through some of the key findings on it. If we pop to the next slide, Liz. So what did people say? A lot of people, for the eligibility worked. Most people found it easy to understand and straightforward. 38% of people didn't include all their eligible woodland area in that. Now, the reasons for that, we've asked why not. For about a third of people, that was down to either size constraints or RPA mapping issues, or their own mapping issues. I know only a very small section of the woodland on my farm is actually eligible, because it's all quite linear woodland, and it's a bit irregular, and I don't know whether it would average 20 meters across. So that was an area of contention. The other reason was mainly down to people trying to manage the risk. They didn't want to go in too hard or commit to something that would cause them problems later on, so they only entered a part, which I think is important, because it wasn't a huge amount of risk involved in this, but risk is still a big part of the equation. The condition assessment, some people found that really useful. I think it was very important to note that most people use the template that was provided. I think it's a little bit, especially going outside your comfort area slightly sometimes. You maybe have to do it in any way you want, but it's knowing when to start. So a lot of people did it and had a good time on it. Quite a big proportion of people wanted to seek extra guidance or support to get that done. Which for us, trying to do something advice-free is a bit of a red flag. So we definitely need to look at that content. If it was criticised for being too technical, too complex, or mainly too time-consuming. Because as farmers, we are capable of dealing with complex technical requirements. We do all the time, but it's the time out of your farming day to do that, and that's important. But what it was very good, it was very effective in engaging farmers and changing their perspectives to a certain extent. There was one quote here which sums it up for me. I would not have been able to complete the woodland condition assessment had I not got help from an expert. But reading the woodland condition assessment has given me more confidence, purpose, and enthusiasm, and made me realise I'm a custodian in the woodland and I've connected more with it. Just summed it up, really. Next one, please, Liz. So the woodland threat webinars, we've all done those. We're all pretty used to webinars now, but most people said they were understandable, useful, and easy to use. Big success. We might change some of the content to make it a bit more relevant for farmers and less negatively focused, some opportunities in there. Open space and rides and deadwood, these went well, but there were most people realized it was a thing to do with value, but there were certain situations when there was a smaller where people didn't feel that it was appropriate, like in that quote there. So especially for the smaller blocks, we have to look at where it's appropriate and say you've got an establishing wood. Do we want deadwood in there? Would be felling trees to make deadwood, bringing it in. For the majority, it worked well, but there's a few situations where it didn't, and we're really looking hard at those now to make sure we've got something that works for everybody. Again, it comes back to that old thing. It's the payment rate. How much can we ask you to do for £49 a hectare? professional chainsaws are more than £1,000 now. So it's making sure that what we're asking you to do on this is appropriate for the rate that we're given, and the support's there for any aspirations you do have. Next one, please, Liz. There we go. I've got it now. So expanding woodland with so these are the optional actions. As I said, we didn't have a huge amount of uptake in these, but I think it's important to look at some of the questions that we asked as well, because we got great feedback. 50% were positive about creating or expanding woodland, shows a good proportion that weren't. 48% were happy to do that woodland creation without an expert, and we found we did have an experienced group of people here. 66% had done this in the past. 55% said creating woodland won't benefit the farm business, which I think is a good point to make to people who are looking at this sort of funding, saying, well, look, for everybody, we don't always see the benefit of it. And I think I'm surprised that value isn't higher in some regards, because a lot of the time doing these sorts of things, it can be an altruistic act. So looking at that feedback honestly and seeing what people are saying and how it works for them. In terms of the maintenance, 53% said a grant like that would make them more likely to create woodland. And I think it is important we are making sure we're supporting people in that establishment process, because it's a long process. But only 24% thought the level of funding there was appropriate. So we're going to need to those sorts of things need to be actively encouraged. It's also taking the land out of production. There's lots of different factors in there, and it can be quite a high burden. So it's worth thinking about. Next one, please, Liz. So overall, although I've picked on a few bits there, and I am usually quite hard on these sorts of things because I'm interested in making changes to make things better. The majority of people sort of decided they would take part. The bell curve on our agrees and strongly agrees. It's in the right direction there, but we do have quite a few in the neutral category, and I think they're undecided. To look honestly, here's some of the points in that group. Again, it comes down to payment rate. We've all worked. It all depends on financial incentive. We've worked long enough for nothing. I think it's important to note we need to be paid for the time we've done. But then there's the advantages. Woodland would not be used elsewhere, so revenue is a no-brainer. It's about managing that opportunity and that risk, and it does tend to come down to risk. A lot of people worried about the RPA and the implications of not doing something right, especially outside their comfort zone. So it comes down to that. We had a great, enormous split within people who were involved. I think the variation was really in terms of the woodland themselves. Every single farm wood's different. They're often bits of marginal ground that couldn't be ploughed. Their composition and their shape is very different to traditional forestry. I think that needs to be taken into account. The requirements are different. Every business is different. The time and inputs a dairy farm is able to put in is very much different than a small mixed farm or somewhere in the uplands. And I saw that particularly on my visits. It was all very, very different. And really it comes down to the people that are involved. Time, a lot of people are under huge time pressure. Some of the best sites I saw, one guy worked was a dairy. He worked on a dairy farm. He was a vet 3 days a week. And for him, it was all about the amount of time spent on an application form, because that's what he said. If I spend a day doing forms, I don't see my kids that week. And I think it's understanding the personal nature behind it as well to make sure we're getting it right. Last slide, please, Liz. So what do I think the way forward there, and what the next steps based on what we learned? We need a sympathetic approach so we can appreciate the constraints farmers are working under. make sure the payment rate's appropriate, and we're building their confidence and trust through when we're looking to inspect. The actions we've got, they need to be easy to understand, implement, and measure. That way, your idea of risk when you're going in it, you can see it's upfront and obvious. One size doesn't fit all. It's down to appropriateness, making sure everything is appropriate for the different woodlands, businesses, and individuals involved. And I think that's the first step. So we're looking at taking what we've learned in the pilot, which has captured a very in-depth and detailed group of a very engaged group of farmers. We've got some incredible responses that we're going to share. We'll be using that now to help shape changes to the Farm Woodland standard and see where we can fit that, but also looking at the gaps that it's highlighted, pushing those out and trying to secure a better outcome for farmers across the L11, because we've got a great chunk of farmer opinion here. It's got much more value than we will just use it for. So we're making sure that those voices are heard right across the whole framework. Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Harry. I hope you found that useful, and we will have the full report there. That was just a quick snapshot, but the full report will be on SharePoint with the links in the chat. So do take a look. I just launched, this is be the last poll during the webinar, and then you will have a quick survey at the end. So this is about the Farm Woodland study results, and everyone, even if you didn't have the Farm Woodland in your pilot agreement, please have a go at answering this. So we're just looking to see what would be your biggest concerns you would have while putting your woodland. Would it be advice? Would it be the time, payment rates, application processes, that you wouldn't be interested in that kind of option, or you don't have the woodland on your farm? Some may have no concerns as well. Not to worry if you can't answer these polls, they're just to give us a rough idea, and hopefully a bit of fun for you, and to give you an idea of what each other are thinking as well. So I'll just give you a few more seconds. We've had 100 answer there, which is a great sample. So I'll end and share the results. And it seems like quite a good, well, the third of you there don't have land there to enter, but it does come down to the payment rates. That's quite a big factor there. So thanks everyone for that one. And I'll pass back to Louise.
Thank you very much indeed, Liz, and to the other presenters. So we've got about 10 minutes now to answer some of your questions. What I will say is that the team have been busy trying to answer some of your questions during the session as you submitted them. So if you do open the Q&A tab and you think, oh, where's my question gone? Please do go to the answer tab, and you will see that a lot of them have already been answered. We may have the opportunity to go through some of those and touch on some of those answers, but we'll look at the open ones first. I can see Shirley has got a hand up. Shirley, unfortunately, we can't speak on the webinar today, but if you do have a question, please pop it into the Q&A or into the webinar chat, and we can reach out and help you. So we've got a question from Tony Langford, and this is about the capital grants. Are the capital CS standalone capital grants not already available to SFI Pilot participants before the 1st of February? So the answer to that, and I will hand over to Sam in a moment in case he wants to add anything to this, but when we developed the pilot, we developed a specific capital grants offer for land that was in the pilot associated with the standards that we had. So there was a selection of the items that are available in the CS standalone capital grants that you could apply for. So what we are doing following your feedback is opening it up, because we know that some of you wanted to get access, were restricted to accessing the ones that we had in the pilot offer. So by opening up from the 1st of September, you will have full range to the, which I think gives you access to 2/3 more capital items than you would under the pilot offer. Sam, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, thanks, Luz. No, I think that's yeah, that's a pretty fair analysis of it. Yeah, it's just really to give more flexibility from the bespoke scheme that we had before.
Okay, we've got a really good question from Richard here, and again, I'll begin and hand over to you, Sam, if you've got anything to understand. I understood from the policy update webinar, which would stop the pilot scheme and enter SFI 23, which would work much better for our farm. Is this correct? So I hope from Sam's presentation, it was outlined that the pilot will continue for the full 3 years of your agreement. Even when we begin issuing 23 agreements, your pilot agreement will still be live. If you want to come out of your pilot agreement and enter into SFI 23, there's a couple of ways you can do that, and you need to have a think about what you want to do on your land. You could still retain your pilot agreement and add some of the standards that's not in the pilot, that's compatible and not subject to double funding. You could have a separate agreement that sits alongside your pilot agreement that perhaps runs on land outside of the pilot, but also land inside the pilot, as I say, that's compatible and isn't double funding. If you do however, want to take a land out of the pilot and enter it into an action in SFI 23, you can do that during your annual change window. So that's really important because that's coming, your second year of your annual change period is coming up for all of you very soon. It just depends when your agreement started. So please do have a think about what's best for your farm. And if you do want to take some of the parcels out of the pilot at enter 23, you can do it during the annual change period. Sam, anything that you wanted to add?
No, I think that's yeah, no, that's fine. It is up to farmers what they want to do, but the annual change period gives you that opportunity to do it without any sort of recoveries. If you did it sort of mid-term, then there's a potential for recovery there.
Thanks, Sam. So we've got a question from Nick. When will SFI 23 be open and why are CS applications closing beforehand? So I think it's fair to say, Nick, that we are in a transition period where we have got quite a few schemes open and open at different times. I think the idea is that we, through the agricultural transition process, that we streamline that so that we have more of they're more aligned. So we won't have these application windows running as we have had previously. But this year, you are correct, the CS application windows will be closing. SFI 23, the controlled rollout will begin later this month. We're not sure how long the controlled rollout will take. It took about 6 weeks with the scheme in SFI 23, and then once we've finished the control rollout, we will open it up for wider applications. Sam, anything you wanted to add?
No, I think that's fine. Thanks, Louise.
We've got a question from Alec that I'll hand over to you, Sam. Can you have herbal layers on low input grassland?
Thanks, Louise. So I think probably the best sort of advice or best answer for that is that that if you check the if we're sort of referring to the SFI 23 sort of actions, I think that gives the details of the expected activities, and it is more about the actions for low no input grassland in the offer for 23 are based upon how you manage that as low no input grassland. So there are details about the expected management, and I think, you know, and if you're looking at herbal lays, then it might be best to look at what's the most appropriate action or set of actions to select, you know, for that to achieve that. But it's the use and how. So if it's low no input grassland, we'd be expecting the land to be managed in that way, as opposed to managing it in a different way, so for example with herbal lays, but the handbook's really, it is quite clear and quite helpful at sort of setting out the eligibility, the land type, and what we expect you to do within those actions.
Thank you very much indeed, Sam. So I think we've answered most of the open questions now. I think we've got a little bit of time, so I'll just pick out some of the questions that have been answered that may be that may be salient for some of you on the call. So hi, Liz and Brian. Liz and Brian asked about the reports from site visits. So the answer is yes, they should be sent. So if you do have a site visit, you should get a report following the site visit that sets out the findings from that site visit. And we've got I'll hand over to you, Sam. We've got one question about the controlled rollouts. I think we said earlier that the controlled rollout begin early this month. You don't have to be part of the pilot. Any farmer that's receiving BPS can put their name on the list to be part of the controlled rollout. You may not be asked to be part of the controlled rollout, but if you are interested, please get in touch with you and we'll forward your details to the RPA. Sam, sorry.
Sorry, Louise. I was just going to say that there was a question from Paul that come up in the chat, and just about when to make these sort of changes. So if you want to, for example, change your CS scheme, increase your levels of ambition or things in the SFI pilot, and then when to do new agreements. I don't think there's any particular order to do that. Obviously, for your existing scheme, so your existing CS scheme, you're bound by the existing terms and conditions of that scheme. So you'd need to look at that and see when you're able to make amendments to that based upon when it started and what you've got, what the options are in there and the terms and conditions. applications. For SFI Pilot, obviously, as we've said, it's around your annual change window. If you want to do that, you have that option to do that. And then with 23, in terms of stacking or running them in parallel, that will be when that scheme is open. So there's no particular order, but it's just worth remembering the sort of specific dates that apply to the schemes. And I probably made it sound really, really complicated when you've got multiple schemes running.
Thanks, Sam. Sam, I think we've got time for a couple more questions. I've got one here on advice, and if you could scan, see if there's another one that we can pick up in the time. So we've got one regarding is there anywhere where I can get specific advice for my farm business? And what we've just pointed out, if you are receiving BPS, you can get free business advice from organisations. It's fully funded by DEFRA and it's called the Farm Resilience Fund. I know some of you commented on the chat that you've actually you've accessed that support. So we've had really good reports about the advice that you get through that, and you can find out more details and how to get that advice in the link. It's both in the Q&A and in the chat. So please do have a look at that in more detail. Sam, is there any other questions that we can answer?
Yeah, there's a couple. So if some of you, we know that we've got some agents that are supporting SFI Pilot participants and on the call, throughout the actual pilot and on the call this evening. So if there are some and you've got other clients that are interested in applying for SFI 23, currently, before the application sort of formally opens, we're just recommending that you follow the guidance online about applying, which is essentially to get in touch with the RPA and say that you'd like to apply. So that's really the best route for that at the moment. There was another question, now I've completely forgotten what it was, and I'll just see if I could find it again.
Sam, we've got a question here that I'm not sure we'll know the answer to, but let's have a go, and if we don't, we can get the answer out to people. So if you have a CS capital claim open, so this person obviously got a CS capital agreement, can you start a standalone capital application for land in the pilot?
So you can, but you will have to make sure that so we can't run multiple capital applications at the same time. So you can apply for a second one, but you've got to complete your first claim first, or your first sort of claim, and have that completed and done, and then you can apply for a second one. But you can't apply for more than one, to have more than one running at the same time.
We've got a question from James about any idea when the RPA will fix the computer issue on ELS, HLS farms moving into mid-tier or SFI. James, that's a really good question. I know the RPA are working on that and it is a priority issue. I don't have a date that I can tell you when it will be fixed by, unless Sam, you have any more information than I do.
No, I don't, unfortunately.
But they are aware of the issue, James, and they are working on it as a priority. Sam, any last questions before we...
there was another one that does relate to some of the co-location and stacking for the SFI 23. So I know it's come up quite a bit. So I think we're a bit more defined with the pilot standards. But in the handbook, what we also do say is that where it may look that it's incompatible in terms of co-location or stacking, if the actions or the options that you've already got that make it incompatible are on a part parcel, so if they're not the full parcel, sometimes it will be possible to effectively sort of stack them on the same land parcel, but as long as they're on different pieces of land. So if you're if you have a 10 hectare land parcel and you're doing something for example a CS option on 5 hectares of that, effectively it does make that land parcel incompatible at a higher level, but if the action that you then want to do is on a smaller area, sort of within the remaining 5 hectares, there is a possibility to stack that on that land parcel. So I probably made that sound really, really complicated, but there's a section, it's section 4.2 in the handbook that explains what you do. But there is that possibility. You do sort of almost get a second opportunity if you've got sort of spare land from existing land parcels.
Sam, the questions are still coming in thick and fast. So I think what we'll do is there's a couple of important ones in here. So we'll stay on. If you do need to leave, please do so, but we'll pick these up because I think they're important. So we've got a question about when will SFI close so that SFI 23 can be applied for. So SFI 22 has closed to new applications and closed when we made the announcement on SFI 23 back in June. So you can no longer apply for SFI 22. And that was so that we had the time and the time to actually prepare for SFI and the actions that we're going to have in SFI. For everybody who's got a 22 agreement, the RPA is getting in touch with you to let you know what's happening with your agreement and what to expect. So if you have got a 22 agreement as well as a pilot agreement, and RPA hasn't been in touch, they will be in touch with you very soon. Sam, anything you wanted to add to that one?
No, I think that's good, Louise.
We've got a question on, so this is a specific question on CS Capital. On the Capital, we applied for fencing under CS, but didn't start the work in the first 2 years, so never made a claim. Could we apply again under the SFI Pilot or SFI 23? So I think, Julie, that's a really good question. I think if you've already done the work, you can't apply again for the capital grant. So if the work's completed, it wouldn't be eligible. But Sam, have I got that right?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you applied and had an offer but just never did it either, you never completed the work, never did it, and didn't obviously make the claim, then you can then you would be able to close that because it probably still would be open, but you can close it. And then but just to clarify, you wouldn't. It's not so much about making a claim under the SFI Pilot or SFI 23. Up until the end of this month, you can apply for land that's in your pilot agreement. You can apply for capital under the SFI Pilot capital scheme, and from the 1st of September you can apply to the standalone countryside stewardship capital grant scheme. So you don't have to be in an SFI 23 or an SFI Pilot agreement to make that, if you're eligible to do that, if you haven't claimed under your previous one.
Thanks, Sam. Julie's just got back to us to say she did not do the work, so that means
yeah.
So
you should be able to. But if it's still open though, Julie, you may need to close that claim and say that you're not proceeding with that application.
So I think we'll take. Questions are still coming thick and fast, but we'll take a couple more. Can you see on the RPA portal what is stackable before SFI 23 opens? So I think when 23 opens and you go into the system, you can see on there the eligible land that's going to be available and where you can put what's eligible for the different actions in SFI. So you should be able to see on the RPA portal. You can't see it now, but when 23 opens, and not throughout the controller rollout unless you're invited to do so, but if you are, you should be able to see. Anything else you wanted to add to that, Sam?
No.
And
I might have just said sorry, Liz, but no, I don't think you can see it before. You have to be able to go in, unfortunately.
And I think that answers the question that we've got behind that in terms of online application process. What can you see? You can see the eligible land. So anything that's in existing agreements, you should only just be able to see the eligible land, not the stuff that's in existing agreements. So I think we've run over time. So thank you very much, everybody, for bearing with us. Liz, if we could have the next slide, please. I think what we've got is just a few links, just in case you are interested. So there's our pilot learning address. If you do want to get in touch with us, we've got the feedback is a little bit different this evening, so it will pop up when we close the meeting, but please do take the time to tell us what you think of tonight's session, because that will show us how we put on more sessions like this if we do, and the content of them. So thank you very much for you for coming this evening and listening to us, and thank you very much to the team for putting on the webinar as well. So thanks everybody, and good evening. Hope you have a good night.